The blood-soaked rope cut into Dahlia Wilson's wrists as she struggled against her bindings, the rough bark of the cottonwood tree scraping her back raw through the thin fabric of her dress. Her captor's men, who claimed to be acting on behalf of justice, had left her there to die under the merciless Arizona sun of 1878. Dahlia's crime was simple. She had dared to flee her so-called husband, a man twice her age who had purchased her from her debt-ridden father with promises of stability and wealth. Vernon Tillman had shown his true nature on their wedding night, and the following 3 months had been a living nightmare of bruises hidden beneath high collars and long sleeves. The afternoon heat beat down on Dahlia's auburn hair, sweat trickling between her shoulder blades. Her throat burned with thirst, and the coppery taste of blood lingered on her lips from where Vernon had struck her before ordering his ranch hands to teach her a lesson about loyalty. They had dragged her out here, 5 miles from the nearest homestead, and left her with just enough rope slack that her slow death would be prolonged rather than quick. Dahlia's vision blurred as she tried to focus on the horizon, the vast expanse of desert and scrubland stretching before her. A dust cloud rose in the distance, probably just a mirage brought on by her dehydration and desperation. She closed her eyes, conserving what little strength remained. The rhythmic pounding of hoofbeats grew louder, but Dahlia didn't dare hope. When the sound stopped, she kept her eyes shut, fearing Vernon had returned to gloat. "Madam?" The voice was deep but gentle, nothing like Vernon's harsh bark. "Madam, can you hear me?" Dahlia forced her eyes open to see a tall figure silhouetted against the blazing sun. The stranger dismounted from a magnificent chestnut stallion, approaching her cautiously as if she were a wounded animal that might bolt. "Who?" she croaked, her parched lips barely able to form words. "Name's Quentin Walsh," he said, removing his hat and revealing a shock of dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. His face was all angles and planes, tanned from years under the western sun, but his eyes a startling shade of blue held kindness. "Looks like you've found yourself in a mighty difficult situation." As he drew his knife, Dahlia flinched instinctively, but Quentin simply reached above her head to saw through the ropes binding her to the tree. His movements were swift and practiced, and within moments the pressure around her wrists eased. "I'm not going to hurt you," he assured her, supporting her weight as her legs buckled. "Here, drink this. Slowly now." He held a canteen to her lips, and Dahlia sipped gratefully, the lukewarm water the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. When she'd had enough to wet her throat, she found her voice again. "Thank you," she whispered. "They'll kill you if they find out you helped me." Quentin's jaw tightened. "I reckon they can try." He glanced at her torn dress, the bruises forming on her arms, and the dried blood on her wrists. "Who did this to you?" "My husband," Dahlia replied, the word bitter on her tongue. "Vernon Tillman." Recognition flashed in Quentin's eyes. "The cattle baron?" "I've heard stories about him. None too flattering." "They're all true," Dahlia said, attempting to stand straighter despite the pain radiating through her body. "I ran away last night. Got as far as Silver Creek before his men caught me." Quentin nodded, his expression grim. "Well, Mississippi. Dahlia. Dahlia Wilson, that's my maiden name. I refuse to carry his any longer. Miss Wilson," he continued, "I can't leave you out here, and I don't imagine you want to go back to Tillman's ranch." "I'd rather die," she said with quiet intensity. "That won't be necessary." Quentin whistled, and his horse trotted closer. "I'm headed to Tucson. You're welcome to ride with me, at least until we can find you somewhere safe." Dahlia hesitated, weighing her limited options. This stranger could be just as dangerous as Vernon, but something in his steady gaze told her she could trust him. At the very least, dying on the trail with Quentin Walsh would be preferable to the fate that awaited her back at Vernon's ranch. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. Quentin nodded once, as if that settled matters. "Then you'll come with me." He removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders, the fabric warm from his body and smelling of leather, tobacco, and something distinctly masculine. "Can you ride?" "Yes. My father taught me before. She trailed off, not wanting to revisit those memories. With gentle hands, Quentin helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His chest pressed against her back as he reached around to take the reins, and despite everything, Dahlia felt a flicker of something other than fear, a peculiar sense of safety in the arms of this stranger. "Hold tight," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "We've got a long ride ahead." As they rode away from the cottonwood tree that had nearly become her gallows, Dahlia felt the weight of Vernon's shadow beginning to lift. She didn't know what awaited her in Tucson or beyond, but for the first time in months she dared to hope. The Arizona landscape stretched endlessly before them, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. Quentin kept the horse at a steady pace, mindful of his passenger's weakened state. They had traveled several miles in companionable silence before he spoke. "There's a small creek about an hour's ride from here. We'll stop there for the night. You need rest and proper tending to those wounds." Dahlia nodded, her body beginning to ache in earnest now that the immediate danger had passed. Each hoofbeat sent a jolt of pain through her bruised ribs, but she refused to complain. This discomfort was the price of her freedom. "May I ask what brings you out this way, Mr. Walsh?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the pain and partly out of genuine curiosity about her rescuer. "Quentin, please," he corrected gently. "I was heading back from delivering a herd to Fort Bowie. I work as a trail boss for the Jameson outfit in Tucson." "A cowboy, then?" Dahlia said with a small smile. "Of sorts," he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Though I prefer cattlemen these days. Sounds more respectable." The sky had begun to darken by the time they reached the promised creek, a slender ribbon of water cutting through a cluster of cottonwoods and mesquite. Quentin dismounted first, then carefully helped Dahlia down, his strong hands at her waist steadying her as her feet touched the ground. "Can you stand?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Dahlia nodded, though her legs trembled beneath her. "Just need a moment." Quentin quickly set about making camp, unrolling his bedroll and gathering wood for a small fire. His movements were efficient, practiced a man accustomed to life on the trail. Dahlia watched him, feeling both helpless and grateful. "I'm sorry I can't help," she said as he knelt to start the fire. He looked up, the flint in his hand, pausing. "You've got nothing to apologize for, Miss Wilson. You've been through an ordeal that would break many a strong man." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Dahlia's eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to appear any weaker than she already felt. "Still, I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said simply, returning his attention to the fire. Within moments, flames licked at the dry wood, casting a warm glow around their small camp. Quentin rummaged through his saddlebags, producing a small medical kit, some jerky, and a tin of coffee. "It's not much of a supper, but it'll keep body and soul together until morning." "It's a feast compared to what I expected today," Dahlia replied. After they had eaten, Quentin gently cleaned the robe burns on Dahlia's wrists with water from the creek and a clean handkerchief. His touch was surprisingly delicate for such large, calloused hands. "How did you end up married to a man like Tillman?" he asked, carefully applying a salve to her abrasions. Dahlia winced, both from the sting of the medicine and the memory. "My father lost our farm in Kansas after my mother died. He brought us west, hoping for a new start, but he fell into debt with Vernon. When I turned 18 last spring, Vernon offered to forgive everything if my father would give him my hand." She laughed bitterly. "Father didn't even hesitate." Quentin's hand stilled momentarily. "You've been married less than a year, then?" "5 months," she confirmed. "Though it feels like a lifetime." "And your father?" "Died of consumption 2 months after the wedding." "I suspect Vernon knew he was ill when he made the arrangement." Dahlia stared into the fire, its dancing flames hypnotic. "With father gone, there was no one left to care what became of me." Quentin finished bandaging her wrists in silence, but when he spoke, his voice held a quiet intensity. "Well, someone cares now." Their eyes met across the flickering firelight, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first tenuous thread of trust. "Get some rest," he said, standing and brushing off his pants. "You take the bedroll. I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too," Dahlia protested. "I've slept under the stars with nothing but my saddle for a pillow more nights than I can count," he assured her with a small smile. "One more won't kill me." Too exhausted to argue further, Dahlia settled onto the bedroll, Quentin's jacket still draped around her shoulders. Despite her aches and the strangeness of her situation, sleep claimed her quickly, the sound of the creek and Quentin's quiet movements around the camp a soothing lullaby. She woke once in the night, startled by a coyote's distant howl. Quentin sat with his back against a tree, his rifle across his lap, silhouetted against the dying embers of the fire. His head turned toward her at her movement. "All's well," he said softly. "Go back to sleep." Strangely comforted by his vigilance, Dahlia closed her eyes and drifted back into slumber, free from the nightmares that had plagued her for months. Dawn broke in a spectacle of pinks and oranges across the eastern sky. Dahlia stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, scanning the camp for Quentin. He stood by the creek, his back to her, splashing water on his face. The morning light caught in his dark hair, revealing auburn undertones she hadn't noticed before. He had removed his shirt, and Dahlia found herself transfixed by the play of muscles beneath his sun-bronzed skin as he moved. Feeling her gaze, he turned, and Dahlia quickly averted her eyes, heat rising to her cheeks. She heard his soft chuckle as he shrugged back into his shirt. "Morning," he called, approaching the camp. "How are you feeling?" Dahlia took inventory of her body. The aches remained, but the sharp pains had dulled to a more manageable throb. "Better," she answered truthfully. "Thank you for asking. Hungry? I've got some hardtack and the rest of yesterday's jerky. Not much of a breakfast, but it's perfect," she interrupted, smiling despite herself. "You've already done more than enough." They ate in companionable silence, the world around them coming alive with birdsong and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Quentin seemed content to let her set the pace of conversation, neither pressing her to talk nor ignoring her presence. "How far to Tucson?" Dahlia asked as they packed up the small camp. "About 3 days' ride at a steady pace," Quentin replied. "We'll need to stop in Willow Springs for supplies. It's a small settlement, but they have a general store and a place to get a hot meal." Dahlia nodded, though anxiety fluttered in her stomach at the thought of encountering other people. "Will Vernon's men be looking for me there?" Quentin paused in saddling his horse. "Possibly. Tillman has influence throughout the territory. But Willow Springs is small enough that strangers stand out. We'll be careful." "What will we say?" Dahlia pressed. "About who I am, I mean." Quentin considered this as he tightened the cinch on his saddle. "We could say you're my sister, traveling to meet your husband in Tucson. And if someone recognizes me? Then we ride hard and fast," he said, his expression serious. "I won't let them take you back, Dahlia." The use of her given name, spoken with such quiet determination, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She nodded, trusting this man she barely knew with her life and freedom. They set out as the sun cleared the horizon, Dahlia once again seated in front of Quentin on his stallion. The horse, which Quentin had introduced as Samson, seemed unbothered by the double burden, maintaining a steady trot across the arid landscape. "Have you always been a cattleman?" Dahlia asked as they rode, finding conversation easier than dwelling on her fears. "No, madam," Quentin replied, his deep voice rumbling against her back. "Served with the Union Army during the war, though I was just a boy when I enlisted. Afterward I drifted west, tried my hand at mining, then ranching. Found I had a knack for handling cattle and men." "You fought in the war?" Dahlia twisted slightly to see his face. "You can't be much older than I am." A smile creased the corners of his eyes. "I'm 28, Miss Wilson. Lied about my age to enlist when I was 15. My pa had died, and my ma needed the enlistment bounty to keep our farm. Did she? Keep the farm, I mean. A shadow crossed his features. For a time. She passed before I made it home. Influenza took her in '65. I'm sorry, Dahlia said softly. My mother died of the same, back in Kansas. They shared a moment of silence for their lost mothers, the rhythm of Samson's hooves a steady counterpoint to their memories. What about you? Quentin asked eventually. What did you do before Tillman? Dahlia smiled at the recollection of her former life. I helped my father on our farm. And I taught at the local school for a year before we came west. I've always loved book stories of far-off places and grand adventures. A schoolteacher. Quentin nodded appreciatively. That explains your fine way of speaking. Hardly fine. Dahlia laughed. But my mother insisted on proper grammar and a love of literature. She said it was the mark of a civilized person, regardless of circumstances. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was, Dahlia agreed, her voice softening with remembrance. I think she would have liked you, Mr. Walsh. Quentin, he reminded her gently. Quentin, she repeated, the name feeling comfortable on her tongue. They traveled throughout the morning, stopping occasionally to rest Samson and stretch their legs. Despite her initial discomfort, Dahlia found herself relaxing against Quentin's solid presence, her body naturally finding its rhythm with his as they rode. By midday, the landscape had begun to change, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with prickly pear and ocotillo. In the distance, mountains rose blue against the horizon, their peaks still capped with the last remnants of winter snow. We'll stop here for a spell, Quentin announced, guiding Samson toward a rocky outcropping that offered some shade. Let Samson rest and get some food in our bellies. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Dahlia down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and she found herself oddly reluctant to step away from his touch. Thank you, she murmured, suddenly aware of how close they stood. Quentin cleared his throat and took a step back, busying himself with retrieving their meager provisions from his saddlebags. We'll reach Willow Springs by tomorrow afternoon if we keep this pace, he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Dahlia nodded, settling herself on a flat rock in the shade. She watched as Quentin cared for Samson, speaking to the horse in low, soothing tones as he checked his hooves and offered him water from his hat. There was a gentleness to the cowboy that contradicted his rough exterior, a kindness that extended beyond his rescue of her. How did you come to be out this way? She asked when he joined her in the shade, offering her jerky and hardtack. It seems providential that you found me when you did. Quentin considered her question as he chewed. I was taking a shortcut back to Tucson after delivering a herd to Fort Bowie. Not many travel this route. It's drier than the main trail, but faster if you know where the water holes are. He paused, his blue eyes finding hers. Maybe it was providence, or maybe just luck. Either way, I'm glad I came along when I did. As am I, Dahlia said softly. They shared another moment of comfortable silence before Quentin spoke again, his tone carefully neutral. What will you do when we reach Tucson? The question had been weighing on Dahlia's mind as well. I'm not sure, she admitted. I have no money, no family. Perhaps I could find work as a seamstress or a laundress. She hesitated, then added more quietly. Or perhaps as a teacher again, if any school would have me. Why wouldn't they? Quentin asked, frowning. Dahlia gave him a sad smile. A woman fleeing her husband isn't exactly considered respectable, even if that husband is a monster. People talk, and rumors spread faster than wildfire. Quentin's jaw tightened. That's not right. Perhaps not, but it's the way of things. Dahlia brushed crumbs from her skirt, trying to appear more pragmatic than she felt. I'll manage somehow. I've survived this far. You could. Quentin began, then stopped himself, looking away. I could what? He shook his head. Never mind. We should get moving if we want to make it to the next water hole by nightfall. Dahlia wanted to press him but sensed his reluctance. Whatever he had been about to suggest, he wasn't ready to voice it. She nodded and allowed him to help her to her feet, trying to ignore the spark that passed between them when their hands touched. They continued their journey through the afternoon heat, the landscape growing more varied as they traveled. Quentin pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his adventures in the territory, his deep voice painting vivid pictures of encounters with Apache warriors, Mexican vaqueros, and the colorful characters who populated the western frontier. Dahlia found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn into his tales and the warmth of his storytelling. In return, she shared memories of her childhood in Kansas, her brief tenure as a teacher, and her dreams of someday seeing the great cities of the East: Boston, New York, Philadelphia. "You still could, you know," Quentin said when she spoke of her abandoned aspirations. "See those cities, I mean. You're young yet, with plenty of life ahead of you." "Perhaps," she allowed, though the possibility seemed remote. "But first I need to establish myself somewhere safe, far from Vernon's reach." "California might suit you," Quentin suggested. "It's a long journey, but once there, you'd be beyond Tillman's influence. San Francisco is growing fast, with opportunities for educated women." "Is that where you're bound eventually?" Dahlia asked, curious about his own aspirations. Quentin was quiet for a moment. "I thought about it. The Jameson outfit has connections there, and they've offered to send me west with herds bound for the coast." He sighed, the sound reverberating through his chest against her back. "But truth be told, I've grown fond of Arizona. Been thinking of putting down roots here, maybe buying a small spread of my own someday." "That sounds lovely," Dahlia said, trying to imagine Quentin settled on his own ranch, building something permanent after years of wandering. "It's just a dream for now," he replied, his tone lighter. "Need more than trail boss wages to make it happen." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Quentin guided Samson toward a cluster of cottonwoods that marked another small water source. They made camp with the same efficiency as the night before, though Dahlia insisted on helping despite her still tender wrists. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Quentin said as she struggled to gather kindling with her bandaged hands. "I'm not trying to prove anything," she countered. "I simply don't want to be useless." Quentin's expression softened. "You're far from useless, Dahlia Wilson. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." His words caught her off guard, and she stilled, a bundle of sticks clutched against her chest. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "Not many would have survived what you've endured, let alone maintained the spirit to start anew." Dahlia didn't know how to respond to such forthright admiration. No one had ever spoken to her with such genuine respect before. She mumbled a thank you and busied herself with arranging the kindling, her cheeks warm with more than just the evening heat. That night, after a slightly more substantial meal thanks to a rabbit Quentin had shot during their ride, they sat beside the fire, watching the flames dance in the gathering darkness. The desert night had turned cool, and Dahlia wrapped Quentin's jacket more tightly around her shoulders. "We should reach Willow Springs by midday tomorrow," Quentin said, pouring the last of the coffee into her cup. "We'll need to be careful, but it's small enough that news of your disappearance might not have reached them yet." "What if it has?" Dahlia couldn't keep the worry from her voice. Quentin's expression turned serious. "Then we'll deal with it. I made you a promise, Dahlia. I intend to keep it." She studied his face in the firelight, the strong planes of his jaw and the determined set of his mouth. In the short time she had known him, Quentin Walsh had shown himself to be a man of integrity, the kind of man she had once believed existed only in the novels she treasured. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Risking so much for a stranger?" Quentin poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "My sister," he said after a long pause, "was married to a man like Tillman. A man who hurt her behind closed doors and smiled at the world outside them." Dahlia's heart constricted. "What happened to her?" "She ran like you." His voice had grown rough with emotion. "But there was no one to cut her loose or ride beside her." They found her body in the Brazos River 3 days later. He looked up, meeting Dahlia's eyes across the flames. I was away, driving cattle to Kansas. By the time I got the news and returned home, her husband had already moved on, taken up with another young woman from a desperate family. I'm so sorry, Dahlia whispered, understanding now the depth of his commitment to helping her. I couldn't save Eliza, he said, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his eyes. But maybe, in some small way, helping you set something right in the world. Without thinking, Dahlia moved to sit beside him, taking his large, calloused hand between her smaller ones. Thank you for telling me, she said. And thank you for saving me, Quentin Walsh. He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face, something unreadable in his expression. For a breathless moment, Dahlia thought he might lean closer, but instead, he gently squeezed her hands before releasing them. You should get some rest, he said, rising to his feet. Tomorrow will be a long day. Dahlia nodded, a confusing mixture of disappointment and relief washing over her. She settled onto the bedroll, watching as Quentin took up his position against the tree, rifle across his lap. Despite the emotional weight of their conversation, sleep came quickly, more peaceful than she had known in months. Morning arrived with the cheerful songs of desert birds and the gentle nickering of Samson as he greeted the new day. Dahlia woke to find Quentin already up, heating coffee over a small fire. You're becoming quite the slugabed, he teased, his mood lighter than the previous evening. Sun's been up a full hour. Dahlia sat up, brushing her tangled hair from her face. Some of us didn't have the luxury of sleeping against a tree all night, she retorted with a smile. Quentin laughed, the sound rich and warm in the morning air. Fair enough. There's coffee if you want it, though it's strong enough to float a horseshoe. They broke camp quickly after a simple breakfast, eager to reach Willow Springs and the promise of proper supplies. As they rode, Dahlia found herself increasingly nervous about their reception in the settlement. Her borrowed dress was dirty and torn, her appearance disheveled despite her best efforts to tidy herself with creek water and fingers. You look fine, Quentin assured her, seeming to read her thoughts. Like a woman who's been traveling, that's all. I look like exactly what I am, Dahlia sighed. A runaway wife with no possessions and little prospect. You're wrong about that, Quentin said firmly. You have prospects aplenty. And in Willow Springs, you'll be just another traveler passing through. Keep your head high, Dahlia Wilson. You've done nothing to be ashamed of. His confidence bolstered her spirits, and by the time the small cluster of buildings that made up Willow Springs appeared on the horizon, Dahlia had resolved to face whatever came with as much dignity as she could muster. The settlement consisted of a general store, a small saloon, a blacksmith's forge, and a handful of rough cabins scattered along what passed for a main street. A weathered sign proclaimed, Willow Springs Est. 1867. Inch in faded paint. Not much to look at, Quentin acknowledged as they approached. But they'll have what we need. Remember, you're my sister, traveling to join your husband in Tucson. Dahlia nodded, straightening her shoulders as they rode into town. A few curious glances were cast their way, but most of the town's residents seemed preoccupied with their own affairs. Quentin guided Samson to a hitching post outside the general store and dismounted, helping Dahlia down with gentle hands. Let me do the talking, he murmured, offering her his arm as they entered the store. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside, the air heavy with the scents of coffee, tobacco, and leather. An older man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter. Afternoon, folks, he greeted them. What can I help you with today? Good afternoon, Quentin replied with an easy smile. My sister and I are traveling to Tucson. Had some trouble on the trail. Bandits took most of our supplies. Looking to restock before we continue our journey. The shopkeeper's eyes flicked to Dahlia, taking in her disheveled appearance and the bandages visible on her wrists. Something like suspicion crossed his features. Bandits, you say? Whereabout did this happen? Near Eagle Pass, Quentin answered smoothly. 3 days back. We were lucky to escape with our lives. The man nodded slowly. Been hearing reports of trouble on that route. Apaches, some say, though others claim it's white men pretending to be Indians. He turned his attention fully to Dahlia. You all right, miss? Look like you've had a rough go of it. Dahlia managed a wan smile. I'm fine, thank you. Just tired from the journey. My sister's husband is expecting us in Tucson, Quentin added, subtly steering the conversation away from Dahlia. He'll be worried if we're delayed much longer. This seemed to satisfy the shopkeeper, who began gathering the supplies. Quentin requested coffee, flour, bacon, ammunition for his rifle, and other trail necessities. While the man worked, Dahlia wandered the small store, running her fingers over bolts of fabric and jars of candy with a wistfulness she couldn't quite suppress. Need anything else? The shopkeeper asked as he tallied their purchases. Quentin glanced at Dahlia, then back to the shopkeeper. A dress for my sister, if you have something that might fit. And perhaps some personal items a lady might need for traveling. The man nodded, gesturing to a small section at the back of the store where women's ready-made clothing hung. My wife handles that part of the business. She's over at the boarding house now, but feel free to look through what we have. Dahlia moved toward the clothing, grateful for Quentin's thoughtfulness. She selected a simple calico dress in a soft blue, along with a shawl, comb, and a few other essentials. When she brought them to the counter, Quentin added them to their purchases without comment. The total came to more than Dahlia had expected, and she watched with a pang of guilt as Quentin counted out the coins from a leather pouch. This man who owed her nothing was spending his hard-earned wages to outfit her for a journey with an uncertain end. Is there somewhere my sister might freshen up before we continue? Quentin asked as he stowed their purchases in his saddlebags. Boarding house has rooms for rent, if you're looking to stay the night, the shopkeeper offered. Hot meals and hot baths, both. The Silver Dollar Saloon serves food too, though it might not be the most appropriate place for a lady. Thank you, Quentin said with a nod. We'll look into the boarding house. As they stepped back onto the dusty street, Dahlia touched Quentin's arm. You've spent too much already. We don't need to stay the night. Quentin's expression was gentle but firm. You need a proper meal and a real bath, Dahlia. One night won't delay us significantly, and it will do you good to sleep in a real bed. She wanted to protest further but couldn't deny the appeal of his suggestion. Her body ached from days of riding, and the thought of washing away the dirt and fear of the past days was too tempting to resist. All right, she conceded. But I'll find a way to repay you someday. There's nothing to repay, he said simply, leading Samson toward the small boarding house at the end of the street. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with a small porch and window boxes filled with hardy desert wildflowers. A sign hung from the porch roof. Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house, clean rooms, good food, reasonable rates. The proprietress, a stout woman with silver-streaked dark hair, greeted them warmly, her sharp eyes taking in Dahlia's condition with a mother's concern rather than a stranger's suspicion. You poor dear, she clucked, ushering Dahlia inside while Quentin saw to stabling Samson. You look half dead on your feet. Let's get you a hot bath and something to eat. Dahlia found herself whisked upstairs to a small but immaculately clean room containing a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair. Within minutes, Mrs. Abernathy had arranged for a copper tub to be brought up and filled with steaming water, along with a chunk of lavender-scented soap and a soft towel. Your brother's taken a room across the hall, the older woman informed her. Dinner's at 6 sharp. Don't you worry about a thing, dear. Just get yourself cleaned up and rested. Left alone, Dahlia sank gratefully into the bath, the hot water soothing her aching muscles and washing away days of grime. She ducked her head beneath the surface, wetting her tangled hair before working the soap through it. As she bathed, she couldn't help but think of Quentin, his kindness, his strength, the way his blue eyes seemed to see right through her pretenses to the vulnerability beneath. It was dangerous, she knew, to develop feelings for the man who had rescued her. Her heart had led her astray before, with devastating consequences. And yet, Quentin Walsh was nothing like the men she had known. There was a steadiness to him, an integrity that shone through his every action. By the time she had dressed in her new calico gown, and combed her damp hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck, Dahlia felt almost human again. The woman who gazed back at her from the small mirror above the washstand looked tired but determined, her green eyes clearer than they had been in months. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Dahlia? Mrs. Abernathy says dinner's ready," Quentin's deep voice called. She opened the door to find him freshly shaved and dressed in a clean shirt, his dark hair still damp from his own bath. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. "You look," Quentin began, then cleared his throat. "You look well." "Thank you," Dahlia replied, a small smile playing at her lips. "So do you." He offered her his arm, and together they descended to the dining room, where Mrs. Abernathy had laid out a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Two other boarders, a traveling salesman and an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's postal clerk, joined them at the table. The conversation flowed easily, with Quentin maintaining their cover story of being siblings traveling to Tucson. Dahlia found herself relaxing as the meal progressed, enjoying the simple pleasure of good food and normal conversation after days of fear and uncertainty. After dinner, while the men retired to the porch with pipes and conversation, Mrs. Abernathy drew Dahlia aside to the small parlor. "Your brother tells me you're heading to Tucson to join your husband," the older woman said, her kind eyes studying Dahlia's face. "Yes," Dahlia replied, the lie sitting uncomfortably on her tongue. Mrs. Abernathy nodded slowly. "I've been running this boarding house for 15 years, child. I've seen all manner of travelers come through my doors, including women running from something, or someone." Dahlia's heart raced, but the woman's next words weren't accusatory. "Whatever your situation, you've found a good protector in that young man. The way he looks at you." She smiled knowingly. "Well, let's just say I've seen that look before, and it wasn't one a brother gives a sister. Mrs. Abernathy, The older woman patted her hand. "No need to explain, dear. Your secrets are safe with me. I just wanted you to know that if you need help, there are good people in this territory who will provide it." Touched by the woman's perception and kindness, Dahlia impulsively hugged her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now get some rest," Mrs. Abernathy said briskly, though her eyes remained gentle. "You've got a long journey ahead, whatever your destination may be." Dahlia returned to her room, her mind whirling with Mrs. Abernathy's observations about Quentin's feelings. Had the woman seen something Dahlia had missed, or was she simply a romantic who saw love stories where none existed? She was still pondering this when another knock came at her door. This time, when she opened it, Quentin stood there with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "A rider just came into town," he said quietly. "Brought news from the surrounding ranches. Tillman's put out a reward for information about your whereabouts, a substantial one. And he's described you as having been abducted by a cattle rustler." Dahlia's momentary peace shattered. "He's turned it around to make himself the victim." "It's a clever move," Quentin acknowledged grimly. "Makes every lawman and bounty hunter in the territory our potential enemy." "What do we do?" Dahlia asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Quentin's jaw set in a determined line. "We leave tonight. The moon's bright enough for traveling, and we need to put as much distance between us and Willow Springs as possible before word spreads further." "I'll get my things," Dahlia said, already moving to gather her few possessions. Within 20 minutes they had packed their supplies, paid Mrs. Abernathy, who asked no questions but pressed extra food into their hands with a knowing look, and retrieved Samson from the livery stable. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead as they rode out of Willow Springs, heading southwest toward Tucson. "I'm sorry," Dahlia said once the settlement had disappeared behind them. "I've made you a fugitive alongside me." Quentin's arms tightened briefly around her waist. "Don't apologize. I made my choice with open eyes, Dahlia. We'll figure this out together. The word together sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the shared body heat of their close quarters on horseback. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Dahlia felt a growing certainty about one thing. Whatever happened, she wanted Quentin Walsh beside her. They rode through the night, the moon casting silvery light across the desert landscape. Quentin kept them to less traveled paths, avoiding the main trail to Tucson where they might encounter other travelers or lawmen. The terrain grew more rugged as they continued southwest, the flat desert giving way to rocky hills and eventually the foothills of distant mountains. By dawn, Dahlia was exhausted, her body aching from the extended ride. Quentin, sensing her fatigue, guided Samson toward a sheltered arroyo where they could rest during the heat of the day. "We'll travel at night for a while," he explained as he helped her dismount. "Less chance of being spotted that way." Dahlia nodded, too tired to argue, and gratefully accepted the canteen he offered. They shared a simple breakfast of Mrs. Abernathy's bread and jerky before settling in the shade of a rocky overhang to rest. "Get some sleep," Quentin urged, spreading his bedroll for her. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Dahlia protested. "You've been awake for more than a day." "I'll sleep later," he assured her. "Right now, it's more important that you rest." Too exhausted to argue further, Dahlia lay down on the bedroll, her eyes already heavy. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Quentin's profile as he sat vigilant at the edge of their small camp, his rifle across his knees and his eyes scanning the horizon. She woke to the sound of voices, male voices, approaching their hideaway. Dahlia's eyes flew open to find Quentin crouched beside her, his finger to his lips in a gesture for silence. The sun had moved across the sky, she had slept for several hours. "Tracks lead this way," a gruff voice was saying. "Could be our quarry. Tillman said the woman would be with a tall feller, dark hair. Said he stole one of his best horses to a chestnut stallion." Another voice replied. Dahlia's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the men would hear it. Quentin's expression was grim as he silently checked his rifle, then gestured for her to move deeper into the shadows of the arroyo. "Stay here," he mouthed. "Don't move." Before she could protest, he had slipped away, moving with surprising stealth for such a large man. Dahlia pressed herself against the cool rock wall, straining to hear what was happening. The voices grew closer, and she could make out the sound of horses picking their way down the rocky slope. "Look, your campfire, not more than a few hours old," one of the men called. "Spread out," the gruff voice ordered. "They can't have gone far in this heat." Dahlia held her breath, her fingers digging into the sandy soil beneath her. She had no weapon, nowhere to run if they found her. The minutes stretched endlessly as the men searched the arroyo, their footsteps crunching on the loose stone. A sudden shout broke the tense silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. Dahlia bit her lip to keep from crying out, torn between staying hidden as Quentin had instructed and going to his aid. The decision was made for her when a rough hand grabbed her arm, yanking her from her hiding place. She found herself face to face with a weather-beaten man whose eyes widened in recognition. "It's her!" he called out. "Got the woman!" Dahlia struggled against his grip, but he was far stronger. He dragged her into the open where two other men stood holding a bleeding Quentin between them. One of the bounty hunters had a split lip, and the other sported the beginnings of a black eye, evidence that Quentin hadn't surrendered without a fight. "Let her go," Quentin growled, straining against his captors. "She's done nothing wrong." "That ain't what Tillman says," the man holding Dahlia replied with a sneer. "Says you abducted his wife, stole his property. He's offering $500 for her return and your capture." "He's lying," Dahlia said, finding her voice at last. "I fled because he abused me. This man saved my life when Tillman's men left me to die tied to a tree." The bounty hunters exchanged glances, momentarily uncertain. "She's speaking the truth," Quentin added, his blue eyes blazing with intensity. "Tillman is a monster who beats his wife and calls it discipline. Check her wrists if you don't believe me. See, the rope burns where she was bound." The leader of the bounty hunters, the man with the gruff voice, stepped forward and roughly examined Dahlia's wrists, pushing back the sleeves of her dress to reveal the healing abrasions. "Could have happened any number of ways," he said dismissively. "Ain't our job to judge the truth of it. We're just collecting the bounty. And if you return me to Vernon Tillman, you'll be delivering me to my death," Dahlia said, meeting the man's eyes steadily. "Could you live with that on your conscience?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed the bounty hunter's face, but he quickly masked it. "Tie them both," he ordered his companions. "We ride for Tillman's ranch at first light." Despite their struggles, Dahlia and Quentin were bound and placed under guard while the bounty hunters made camp for the night. They were permitted small sips of water but no food, and kept separated on opposite sides of the camp. As darkness fell, Dahlia watched Quentin across the flickering firelight. Despite his bound hands and the blood drying on his temple, he sat tall, his eyes constantly moving, assessing their situation. When his gaze met hers, he gave an almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise that he hadn't given up. The bounty hunters took turns keeping watch, but as the night deepened, the two who weren't on duty began to doze. The third man, the leader, sat with his back to a rock, his rifle across his knees in an unconscious mimicry of Quentin's earlier vigilance. Dahlia tested her bonds, but they held firm. The rope bit into her already tender wrists, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out in pain. Across the camp, she saw Quentin working at his own bindings, his movements subtle enough to avoid detection. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The leader's head began to nod as fatigue overcame him, though he jerked awake periodically to check on his prisoners. During one such moment of alertness, his eyes met Dahlia's across the dying fire. "Why help a man like Tillman?" she asked softly, careful not to wake the other bounty hunters. "Surely you've heard stories about him." The man shrugged. $500 is $500, lady. I don't get paid to ask questions. What's your name?" Dahlia persisted, seeking some connection that might sway him. He hesitated, then answered gruffly. "Silas. Silas Brewer." "Mr. Brewer," Dahlia continued, her voice gentle but urgent. "I was a schoolteacher before I married Vernon Tillman. My father owed him money, and I was the payment. From our wedding night, he beat me regularly. When I tried to flee, his men tied me to a tree and left me to die of exposure." She held his gaze steadily. "If you return me to him, you're sentencing me to death, as surely as if you pulled the trigger yourself." Silas shifted uncomfortably. "Ain't my business what happens between a man and his wife. Would you say the same if it were your sister? Your daughter?" Quentin's deep voice joined the conversation. "There's a difference between upholding the law and enabling a monster, Brewer." The bounty hunter glared at Quentin. "Shut your mouth. You're just trying to save your own hide." "No," Quentin replied calmly. "I'm trying to save hers. My own life matters little in comparison." Something in his tone made Silas look between them with new understanding. "You two ain't just running partners, are you?" Before either could respond, a distant sound caught their attention: hoofbeats, approaching fast. Silas was on his feet instantly, kicking his companions awake. "Riders coming," he hissed. "Could be Apaches or Tillman's men. Either way, we need to be ready." The other bounty hunters scrambled up, reaching for their weapons. In the confusion, Dahlia saw Quentin finally work free of his bonds, though he kept his hands behind his back to maintain the illusion of captivity. The approaching riders crested a rise, silhouetted against the night sky, 5 men, moving at a gallop. As they drew closer, one called out, "Brewer! That you?" Silas visibly relaxed. "Harrison! What brings you boys out this way?" The newcomers dismounted, and Dahlia's blood ran cold as she recognized one of them, Jeb Mackenzie, Vernon's foreman, the man who had tied her to the tree. He spotted her immediately, a cruel smile spreading across his weathered face. "Well, well, Mrs. Tillman. The boss will be mighty pleased to have you back." His gaze shifted to Quentin, narrowing dangerously. And the hero who thought to steal another man's property. She's not property, Quentin said, his voice tight with controlled fury. She's a woman who deserves better than the likes of Tillman. Mackenzie laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Ain't that sweet? Got yourself a real knight in shining armor, Dahlia. He turned to Silas. We'll take it from here, Brewer. Mr. Tillman sent us specifically to retrieve his wife and deal with her abductor. Deal with? Silas frowned. The bounty specified both were to be brought in alive. Plans change, Mackenzie said dismissively. Tillman wants this handled quietly. Your bounty will be paid in full, of course. A tense silence fell over the camp as Silas considered this new development. Dahlia could see the conflict in his face, the mercenary desire for payment warring with some deeper sense of decency. I don't know, Mackenzie, he said slowly. Something about this don't sit right with me. $500 not sitting right? Mackenzie sneered. Maybe you need a reminder of how things work in this territory. His hand moved to his holster, and the atmosphere shifted instantly from tense to dangerous. Before Mackenzie could draw, Quentin exploded into action. Having freed himself while attention was focused on the conversation, he lunged forward, tackling Mackenzie to the ground. The camp erupted into chaos as both bounty hunters and Tillman's men reached for their weapons. Dahlia, still bound, threw herself to the ground as gunshots split the night air. Through the confusion, she felt hands on her, and looked up to see Silas Brewer cutting her bonds. Run, he urged, pressing a knife into her palm. Get to the horses. I'll try to buy you some time. Stunned by his change of heart, Dahlia scrambled to her feet as Silas turned and fired his rifle into the air, drawing attention away from her. In the flickering firelight, she could see Quentin grappling with Mackenzie, blood streaming from a cut on his cheek. With shaking hands, Dahlia cut through the last of her bindings and moved toward the horses, keeping low to avoid the bullets flying across the camp. She reached Samson first, the chestnut stallion nickering nervously at the commotion. Quickly, she untied his reins from the picket line. Across the camp, she saw Quentin finally overpower Mackenzie, landing a solid punch that left the foreman unconscious. As he rose, his eyes sought Dahlia's through the chaos, relief washing over his features when he spotted her by the horses. More shots rang out as Quentin sprinted toward her, zigzagging to present a difficult target. One of Tillman's men took aim at his back, but before he could fire, Silas Brewer's rifle barked, and the man fell with a cry of pain. Go! Silas shouted to them as he reloaded. Get out of here! Quentin reached Dahlia, lifting her onto Samson's back before swinging up behind her. With a sharp whistle and a kick of his heels, he urged the stallion forward, away from the gunfight still raging in the arroyo. They rode hard through the night, either speaking as they focused on putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Samson, seeming to sense the urgency, ran tirelessly, his powerful muscles carrying them over the rough terrain at a pace that would have been dangerous in daylight. Only when the first gray light of dawn appeared on the horizon did Quentin finally slow their pace, guiding Samson toward a stand of trees that offered some concealment. Both were exhausted, their bodies battered from the fight and the hard ride. As Quentin helped her dismount, Dahlia's legs buckled, and he caught her against his chest. For a moment they simply stood there, hearts pounding in unison, the reality of their narrow escape washing over them. I thought I'd lost you, Quentin murmured into her hair, his arms tightening around her. Dahlia lifted her face to his, seeing the raw emotion in his blue eyes. I thought I'd lost you too, she whispered. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling away, a truth acknowledged. Quentin's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her lower lip. Dahlia's breath caught in her throat as he slowly lowered his head, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she rose on her tiptoes to meet him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that spoke of fear overcome, of gratitude and dawning love. His mouth was soft against hers, the kiss gentle at first, then deepening as Dahlia wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, though his arms remained around her waist. "You've been through so much, and I don't want to take advantage." Dahlia silenced him with another quick kiss. "You didn't take anything I wasn't willing to give, Quentin Walsh. And after everything we've been through together, I think we're well past worrying about propriety." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Even so, I want to do right by you, Dahlia." His expression grew serious. "Which is why we need to get you safely to Tucson, where Tillman has less influence. From there, we can decide our next move." Reality intruded on their moment of connection, and Dahlia nodded, stepping back reluctantly from his embrace. "How far are we from Tucson now?" "A day's ride, maybe a little more," Quentin replied, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "But we'll need to be careful. After last night, Tillman's men will be combing the territory for us." "What about Silas?" Dahlia asked, remembering the bounty hunter's unexpected help. "Do you think he—" Quentin's expression sobered. "I don't know. He took a risk helping us. I hope he made it out." They rested through the morning, tending to Samson and catching a few hours of much-needed sleep in turns. By midday, they were on the move again, keeping to the roughest terrain where pursuit would be difficult. As they rode, Dahlia found herself reflecting on the kiss they had shared and what it might mean for their future. She had known Quentin Walsh for less than a week, yet in that short time, he had shown her more kindness and respect than she had experienced in years. The connection between them was undeniable, but was it born of genuine feeling or merely the intensity of their shared danger? "You're quiet," Quentin observed as the afternoon wore on. "What are you thinking about?" Dahlia hesitated, then decided on honesty. "About what happens after we reach Tucson." "About us." His arms tightened slightly around her waist. "What do you want to happen, Dahlia?" It was a direct question, one that deserved a direct answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "A week ago, my only thought was escaping Vernon. I never imagined I might find—" She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the feeling blooming in her heart. "Find what?" Quentin prompted gently. Dahlia took a deep breath. "Someone who makes me believe in possibilities again. Someone I could care for, if given the chance." Quentin was silent for a long moment, and Dahlia feared she had been too bold, too forward with her feelings. Then his deep voice rumbled against her back. "I've been wandering most of my life, Dahlia. Never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But meeting you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Meeting you has made me think about the kind of future I've always pushed aside. A home, a family, something permanent." Hope fluttered in Dahlia's chest, but caution tempered it. "We barely know each other," she said softly. "And I'm still legally bound to Vernon." "I know," Quentin acknowledged. "Which is why, when we reach Tucson, I want to help you establish yourself, find work, a safe place to live. I have friends there who can assist with legal matters, who might help you secure a divorce." His voice grew more certain. "And then, if you're willing, I'd like the chance to court you properly. To see if what we feel now can grow into something lasting." Tears pricked at Dahlia's eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of a fragile, newborn hope. "I'd like that," she whispered. They rode on through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they approached Tucson. The terrain became more mountainous, with saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the horizon. The air carried the scent of creosote and desert blooms, a perfume uniquely southwestern. As dusk approached, they crested a rise that offered a view of the valley below. In the distance, the adobe buildings of Tucson glowed golden in the setting sun. "We'll camp here tonight," Quentin decided. "Enter the town in the morning when we're rested and can better assess the situation." They made a small, sheltered camp in the lee of a large boulder, foregoing a fire to avoid drawing attention. Their meal was simple, the last of Mrs. Abernathy's bread and some dried fruit, but shared with new understanding between them. After they had eaten, Quentin insisted on checking Dahlia's wrists, his touch gentle as he applied the last of his salve to the rope burns. "They're healing well," he observed. "Still, you should see a proper doctor when we reach Tucson." "I've had worse," Dahlia said with a wry smile, then immediately regretted it when she saw the flash of anger in Quentin's eyes. "You should never have had to endure any of it," he said quietly, his hands stilling on her wrists. "If I ever come face to face with Vernon Tillman, don't," Dahlia interrupted, turning her hands to grasp his. "He's not worth it, Quentin. He's taken enough from me. I won't let him take you too." Quentin's expression softened, and he raised her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to each palm. "You're right. Better to focus on the future than dwell on the past." They settled side by side as night fell, watching the stars appear in the vast desert sky. Despite their exhaustion and the uncertainty that still loomed before them, Dahlia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Whatever challenges awaited in Tucson, she would face them with Quentin beside her. "Get some rest," he urged, spreading his bedroll for her. "I'll take first watch." "Wake me in a few hours," Dahlia insisted. "You need sleep too." Quentin smiled, touching her cheek briefly. "Yes, madam." Dahlia drifted into slumber with the comforting knowledge of his presence nearby, her dreams for once untroubled by fears or memories. Dawn broke clear and bright, the sky a perfect azure canopy over the desert landscape. Dahlia woke to find Quentin already up, scanning the terrain below with a small brass spyglass. "See anything concerning?" she asked, joining him at the edge of their small camp. "Nothing out of the ordinary," he replied, collapsing the spyglass and tucking it into his pocket. "Tucson's coming to life. Freight wagons on the main road, people starting their day." He turned to her with a smile. "Ready to begin the next chapter of your life, Miss Wilson?" Despite her nervousness about what awaited them in the town below, Dahlia returned his smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." They broke camp quickly and mounted Samson for the final leg of their journey. As they descended into the valley, the town of Tucson grew larger before them, a sprawling settlement of adobe and wooden buildings, with the tower of the San Agustin Church rising above the surrounding structures. "It's larger than I expected," Dahlia remarked as they approached the outskirts. "It's growing fast," Quentin agreed. "The railroad's coming through next year, they say. That'll change things even more." They entered town via a side street, avoiding the main thoroughfare where they might attract more attention. Tucson was already bustling with activity, merchants opening their shops, women hanging laundry in small courtyards, children running errands for their parents. The mingled scents of wood smoke, cooking food, and dust filled the air. Quentin guided Samson toward a modest stable at the edge of town. "Jasper's an old friend," he explained as they dismounted. "He'll look after Samson and won't ask too many questions." The stableman, a wiry man with a shock of white hair, greeted Quentin with a hearty handshake. "Walsh! Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Thought you were heading up to Fort Bowie with that herd." "Change of plans, Jasper," Quentin replied easily. "This is Miss Wilson, a friend from back east. She's come to take a teaching position here." Dahlia smiled, following Quentin's lead. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Jasper." The old man's eyes twinkled as he looked between them. "Teaching position, eh? Well, we can certainly use more educated folks in these parts." He patted Samson's neck. "I'll get this fine fellow settled with some oats and fresh water. You two look like you could use the same." "Thanks, Jasper," Quentin said, slipping the man some coins. "We'll be at Sarah's boarding house if you need to find us." As they walked through the streets of Tucson, Dahlia noticed Quentin's vigilance, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, how he positioned himself between her and other pedestrians. His hand occasionally brushed the revolver at his hip, a reminder that their danger had not passed simply because they had reached their destination. "Who is Sarah?" Dahlia asked as they turned onto a quieter residential street. "Sarah Jameson. She's the widow of my former boss at the cattle company. Runs the finest boarding house in Tucson and happens to be one of the kindest women you'll ever meet." Quentin's expression grew more serious. She's also discreet, which is what we need right now. The Jameson boarding house was a 2-story adobe structure with a small garden visible through an arched gateway. Quentin led Dahlia through the gate and up to the front door, which opened before he could knock. A tall woman with silver-streaked black hair stood in the doorway, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile at the sight of Quentin. "I thought I heard Jasper's boy saying you were back," she said, pulling him into a brief embrace. "Though you weren't expected for another week at least." "Hello, Sarah," Quentin replied, returning her hug. "I'm afraid I've come with a bit of trouble." Sarah's sharp eyes moved to Dahlia, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the fading bruises on her face. Without hesitation, she stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Then you've come to the right place. Trouble's an old friend of mine." Once they were settled in Sarah's kitchen with steaming cups of coffee, Quentin explained their situation: Dahlia's marriage to Tillman, her escape, his rescue, and the pursuit that had dogged them to Tucson. He spared no details, and Dahlia marveled at the straightforward way he presented their story, without embellishment or excuse. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing grimmer as the tale unfolded. When Quentin finished, she reached across the table to take Dahlia's hand. "You're safe here, child," she said firmly. "Vernon Tillman's reputation has reached even Tucson, and he'll find no welcome in my home." "Thank you," Dahlia replied, touched by the woman's immediate acceptance and support. "But I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Sarah waved away her concern. "Trouble and I are old acquaintances. Besides, my late husband left me with connections throughout the territory, including with the law. Judge Parker is a personal friend, and he has no love for men who abuse their wives." Hope sparked in Dahlia's chest. "Do you think? Could he help me obtain a divorce?" "It won't be easy," Sarah cautioned. "The law generally favors husbands in such matters. But with evidence of abuse, and witnesses to corroborate your story, it's possible." She glanced at Quentin. "Your testimony would be crucial." "I'll do whatever it takes," he said without hesitation. Sarah nodded, satisfied. "For now, you both need rest. Quentin, you know where your usual room is?" "Dahlia, I'll put you in the blue room at the back of the house. It has its own entrance if a quick departure becomes necessary." The practicality of this arrangement spoke volumes about Sarah's understanding of their situation. Dahlia felt a rush of gratitude for this forthright woman who had so readily taken them in. After being shown to her room, a cozy space with simple furnishings and, as promised, a blue quilt on the bed, Dahlia finally allowed herself to truly relax. She was safe, at least for the moment, in a house where Vernon had no power. The luxury of a real bed, clean sheets, and the knowledge that Quentin was just down the hall nearly overwhelmed her with emotion. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Sarah holding a bundle of clothing. "These belong to my daughter," the older woman explained. "She's married and living in California now, but she left some things behind. They should fit you well enough until we can get you properly outfitted." "You're very kind," Dahlia said, accepting the bundle. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Sarah's eyes softened. "You remind me of myself at your age, facing a world that doesn't make things easy for women on their own. I had help when I needed it most. Now I'm passing that kindness along." She patted Dahlia's arm. "Rest now. We'll talk more at supper." Left alone, Dahlia explored the clothes Sarah had brought: a simple day dress, a nightgown, and various necessities. The kindness of strangers continued to amaze her, from Mrs. Abernathy in Willow Springs to Sarah Jameson here in Tucson. Perhaps there was hope for her new life after all. After washing with the water provided in a pitcher on the washstand, Dahlia changed into the clean clothes and lay down on the bed, intending only to rest for a moment. Exhaustion claimed her immediately, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to soft evening light filtering through the curtains, and the distant sounds of conversation from elsewhere in the house. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, panic rising in her throat until her surroundings came into focus: the blue quilt, the simple furnishings of her room at Sarah's boarding house. Safe, she was safe. Dahlia rose, smoothing her borrowed dress and running her fingers through her tangled hair before venturing out to find her hosts. She followed the sounds of conversation to the kitchen, where she found Quentin, Sarah, and an older man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard seated around the table. Quentin rose immediately when she entered, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Dahlia, did you rest well?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, smiling despite the flutters of nervousness at the stranger's presence. Sarah gestured her toward an empty chair. "Dahlia, this is Judge William Parker. I sent word to him this afternoon about your situation." The judge stood, bowing slightly. "Miss Wilson, Sarah has told me something of your circumstances, though I would appreciate hearing the full account from you when you feel able." Dahlia swallowed hard, steeling herself for another retelling of her ordeal. "Of course, Your Honor. And thank you for coming so quickly. The abusive power is something I cannot abide," the judge said, his voice gentle but firm. "Particularly when that power is wielded by a husband against his wife." Over a simple but hearty supper of beef stew and fresh bread, Dahlia once again recounted her story: her father's debt to Tillman, their marriage, the abuse that followed, her escape, and Quentin's rescue. Judge Parker listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never doubting her account. When she had finished, the judge was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled before him. "You have grounds for divorce on the basis of cruelty," he said at last. "However, given Tillman's influence and the general bias of the courts, it will not be a simple matter. He will likely contest it vigorously." "I understand," Dahlia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I will not return to him. I would rather live as a fugitive for the rest of my days." Judge Parker nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "That won't be necessary, Miss Wilson. The law may be imperfect, but it is not entirely unjust. I believe with proper documentation of your injuries, witness testimony, and perhaps statements from others who have observed Tillman's behavior, we can build a case the court cannot dismiss." "What documentation would be needed?" Quentin asked, his expression serious. "A physician's examination and sworn statement would be ideal," the judge replied. "And statements from anyone who witnessed the abuse or its aftermath, including you, Mr. Walsh, as you observed the conditions in which Miss Wilson was left by Tillman's men." Sarah spoke up. "Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell is in town this month, conducting examinations at the Women's Aid Society. She would be sympathetic to Dahlia's case and has the credentials that would carry weight with the court." Judge Parker's eyebrows rose. "Dr. Blackwell? That would be a significant advantage. Her reputation is beyond reproach, even among those who disapprove of women in medicine." Hope began to build in Dahlia's chest, tempered with caution. How long would such a process take? "Several months at minimum," the judge admitted. "The courts move slowly, and Tillman will likely employ delaying tactics. During that time, you would need to remain somewhere safe, as he will have legal right to reclaim you until the divorce is finalized." "She can stay here," Sarah said firmly. "My home is well known in Tucson, but so is my friendship with you, Judge. Tillman would be foolish to make a move against your protection." The judge nodded. "Indeed. And I can issue a temporary restraining order citing the evidence of abuse, which would legally prevent him from approaching you while the case is pending." He turned to Quentin. "Mr. Walsh, your testimony will be crucial, but it also puts you at risk. Tillman has already branded you a kidnapper and cattle thief. You could face charges yourself." "I understand the risk," Quentin said quietly. "And I accept it. Dahlia's safety and freedom are worth whatever consequences come my way." His words sent a wave of emotion through Dahlia: gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. Beneath the table, she reached for his hand, finding it warm and steady against her own. "Very well," Judge Parker said, pushing back from the table. "I'll begin drawing up the necessary papers tonight. Miss Wilson, I suggest you see Dr. Blackwell as soon as possible tomorrow, if it can be arranged." The fresher the evidence of abuse, the stronger our case. I'll take her, Sarah offered. The doctor holds clinic hours in the morning. As the judge prepared to leave, he paused, his expression softening as he looked at Dahlia. Take heart, young lady. The path ahead is difficult, but not impassable. And you have allies now, something Vernon Tillman, for all his wealth and influence, cannot claim. After the judge had gone, Sarah insisted that both Dahlia and Quentin retire early, citing their exhaustion from the journey. As they stood in the hallway outside their respective rooms, a momentary awkwardness fell between them, the first since their kiss the previous morning. Do you think it will work? Dahlia asked softly, breaking the silence. The divorce, I mean. Quentin's expression was serious as he considered her question. Judge Parker is a good man, and he knows the law better than most. If anyone can help you break free of Tillman legally, it's him. He hesitated, then added, but even if it takes longer than we hope, or if complications arise, I want you to know that I meant what I said. I'll stand by you through this, Dahlia, however long it takes. His sincerity touched her deeply. Why? She asked, needing to hear his reasons. You barely know me, yet you've risked everything to help me. Why? Quentin took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Because from the moment I found you tied to that tree, something in me recognized something in you. Your courage, your resilience, even half dead from thirst and fear, you had more spirit than most people I've known my whole life. His voice softened. And with each day we've traveled together, that feeling has only grown stronger. Dahlia's heart raced at his words. I feel it too, she admitted. This connection between us. It terrifies me and comforts me all at once. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Terrifies you? The last time I trusted my heart, I ended up married to Vernon Tillman. She explained, her voice barely above a whisper. And yet, with you, I find myself wanting to trust again, despite everything. Quentin's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a summer breeze. I would never hurt you, Dahlia. That's a promise I can make with absolute certainty. I believe you, she said, and realized with some surprise that she truly did. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Dahlia rose on her tiptoes to meet him. This kiss was different from their first, not born of desperation and relief, but of growing understanding and tender feeling. His lips moved softly against hers, and Dahlia felt herself melting into his embrace, her hands resting lightly on his chest. When they parted, Quentin pressed his forehead to hers. We should get some rest, he murmured, though he made no move to step away. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Yes, Dahlia agreed reluctantly. Good night, Quentin. Good night, Dahlia, he replied, pressing one more gentle kiss to her forehead before releasing her. Sweet dreams. As Dahlia slipped into her room, her heart lighter than it had been in years, she thought that for the first time in a very long while, sweet dreams might indeed be possible. The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, Sarah accompanied Dahlia to see Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, a pioneering female physician whose compassionate examination and detailed documentation of Dahlia's injuries provided crucial evidence for the divorce proceedings. Judge Parker filed the initial petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty, and as predicted, word reached Vernon Tillman within days. His response was swift and furious, a counter-petition claiming that Dahlia was mentally unstable and had been abducted by Quentin, whom he characterized as a disreputable drifter with designs on Tillman property. He's trying to paint me as insane, Dahlia said bitterly after Judge Parker brought news of the counter-petition. A common tactic when wives try to leave their husbands. It's transparent and won't stand up to scrutiny, the judge assured her. Dr. Blackwell's assessment of your mental faculties was quite clear, and we have multiple witnesses to Tillman's abuse. However, he added with a note of caution, this does mean he's committed to fighting the divorce. Things may get uglier before they improve. I'm prepared for that, Dahlia said, squaring her shoulders. I won't be intimidated back into captivity. Throughout these legal maneuverings, Quentin remained steadfastly by her side, accompanying her to meetings with the judge and standing as her primary witness. His own legal jeopardy, the charges of kidnapping and horse theft that Tillman had levied against him, was temporarily held at bay by Judge Parker's influence, but remained a looming threat. Despite these challenges, Dahlia found herself settling into life in Tucson with surprising ease. Sarah introduced her to the local Women's Aid Society, where her education and experience as a teacher were warmly welcomed. Within 2 weeks of her arrival, Dahlia had secured a position teaching at a small school on the outskirts of town. "It's not much," she told Quentin as they walked back to the boarding house after her first day. "The building is little more than a shack, and the children's education has been spotty at best. But they're eager to learn, and the parents are grateful for any instruction their children receive." Quentin smiled, his eyes warm with pride. "They're lucky to have you. You light up when you talk about teaching, it's clearly your calling." Dahlia blushed at his praise. "What about you? Will you be heading back to the Jameson outfit soon?" She tried to keep her tone casual, though the thought of him leaving sent a pang through her heart. "Not just yet," he replied. "I've spoken with Sarah about her husband's holdings. Turns out the Jameson outfit needs a new foreman for their southern range, a position that would keep me in Tucson most of the year." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. "I'm considering taking it." Joy bubbled up in Dahlia's chest. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity," she said, unable to suppress a smile. "And selfishly, I'm glad it would keep you nearby." Quentin took her hand, interlacing their fingers as they walked. "That's the main appeal, truth be told. The work is good and the pay fair, but staying close to you is what matters most to me now." Their courtship progressed with careful deliberation, mindful of both Dahlia's pending divorce and the gossiping tongues of Tucson society. They maintained separate residences at Sarah's boarding house but spent their free time together, sharing meals, attending church services, and taking chaperoned walks through the town. In the evenings, they often sat on the boarding house's small porch, talking long into the night about their pasts, their hopes, and the future they were beginning to envision together. Dahlia learned of Quentin's childhood in Missouri, his service during the war, and his years of wandering afterward. In turn, she shared memories of her mother, her love of literature, and her dreams of someday having a classroom filled with books for her students. "You could have that, you know," Quentin said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. "A proper schoolhouse with all the books you could want." Dahlia smiled at the thought. "Perhaps someday. For now, I'm grateful simply to be teaching again." "I mean it," Quentin insisted, turning to face her. "The position with the Jameson outfit comes with land enough for a small ranch, and then some. Part of it could be set aside for a proper school." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "It could be our contribution to the community. Our legacy." The word "our" hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Dahlia's heart quickened as she realized what Quentin was suggesting, not just a future for herself, but a shared one. "Quentin," she began, uncertain how to respond to the implied promise in his words. He took her hands in his expression earnest. "I know it's too soon to speak of such things definitively. Your divorce isn't final, and we're still getting to know one another. But I want you to know that when the time is right, when you're truly free and have had time to heal, I intend to ask you to marry me, Dahlia Wilson." Tears pricked at Dahlia's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. "I would consider it the greatest honor," she whispered. "When the time is right." Their kiss was gentle and full of promise, a pledge for the future rather than a demand for the present. The weeks stretched into months as Dahlia's divorce proceeded through the territorial court system. Vernon Tillman, true to form, employed every delaying tactic available, demanding psychiatric evaluations, questioning the validity of witness testimony, and even attempting to have Judge Parker removed from the case for bias. Each maneuver was countered by the judge and their growing circle of allies. Dr. Blackwell's reputation proved invaluable, her testimony regarding Dahlia's physical and mental state carrying significant weight with the court. Silas Brewer, The bounty hunter who had helped them escape came forward with his own statement about Tillman's men and their intentions toward Quentin. Most surprising was the arrival of one of Tillman's former ranch hands, a young man named Thomas who had witnessed Vernon's abuse firsthand and could no longer reconcile it with his conscience. His testimony about Dahlia being tied to the tree and left to die provided the most damning evidence against Vernon. Through it all, Quentin remained Dahlia's rock, his steady presence a constant reminder of why she continued to fight. Their relationship deepened despite the stress of the legal battles, their shared adversity forging a bond that mere courtship could not have created. Finally, in the spring of 1879, nearly a year after Quentin had cut her free from that cottonwood tree, Judge Parker called them to his chambers with news. "The Territorial Court has granted your petition, Miss Wilson," he announced, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "Your marriage to Vernon Tillman is officially dissolved. You are, in the eyes of the law, a free woman." Dahlia sat in stunned silence, unable to fully process the words she had longed to hear for so many months. Beside her, Quentin squeezed her hand gently, his own joy evident in the brightness of his eyes. "What about the charges against Quentin?" she asked when she found her voice again. "Dismissed," the judge replied. "Without Tillman's marriage claim, the kidnapping charge was rendered moot. As for the horse theft, Mr. Walsh has provided ample evidence that Sampson was purchased legitimately from the Jameson outfit." Relief washed over Dahlia in a wave so powerful she felt light-headed. "It's over then," she whispered. "Truly over." "It is," Judge Parker confirmed. "Though I would advise caution for a time. Men like Tillman don't take defeat gracefully, and while he has no legal recourse left, there are other ways he might seek to express his displeasure." "We'll be careful," Quentin assured him, his expression serious despite the joy of the moment. As they left the judge's chambers, Dahlia felt as though she were walking on air. The spring sunshine seemed brighter, the desert flowers more vibrant, the very air sweeter in her lungs. Freedom, true freedom, was finally hers. "What would you like to do now?" Quentin asked as they strolled through the plaza, his hand warm around hers. "How shall we celebrate your emancipation?" Dahlia considered the question, a smile playing at her lips. "I want to see this land you've been telling me about, the place where you envision our school." Quentin's eyes lit up. "Really? It's a bit of a ride, but we could be there by late afternoon if we leave now." "Then let's go," Dahlia said decisively. "I want to see our future, Quentin Walsh." They collected Sampson from the stable and rode out of Tucson, heading south into the rolling grasslands that spread beneath the Santa Rita Mountains. The landscape was lush with spring growth, wildflowers dotting the meadows with splashes of color. As they crested a gentle rise, Quentin reined Sampson to a halt. "There," he said, pointing to the valley below. "That's the Jameson South Range. And that rise over there, with the oak trees and the creek running alongside, that's the parcel that comes with the foreman position." Dahlia followed his gesture, taking in the picturesque setting. A cluster of oak trees crowned a small hill, a meandering creek forming a natural boundary on one side. The land sloped gently down to a meadow that would be perfect for grazing cattle or horses. "It's beautiful," she breathed, already envisioning a small ranch house nestled among the oaks, a schoolhouse by the creek where children could study and play. "Absolutely perfect." Quentin guided Sampson down the slope toward the trees, and when they reached the highest point of the rise, he helped Dahlia dismount. Together they stood, taking in the panoramic view of what could be their home. "Dahlia," Quentin said, his voice suddenly serious as he turned to face her. "I know we agreed to wait until the time was right. If it's still too soon, I understand. But standing here with you, seeing this place through your eyes." He took a deep breath. "The time feels right to me." Understanding dawned on Dahlia as Quentin took both her hands in his. "Quentin." He sank to one knee before her, his blue eyes earnest and full of love. "Dahlia Wilson, from the moment I cut you free from that tree, my life has had a purpose it lacked before. You've shown me what courage truly means, what love can be when it's built on respect and admiration rather than possession." He squeezed her hands gently. I love you, Dahlia. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears of joy spilled down Dahlia's cheeks as she looked at this man who had rescued her in more ways than he could ever know. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly. Yes, Quentin Walsh. I would be proud to be your wife. He rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss full of passion and promise. When they finally parted, both breathless and laughing, Quentin reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver ring set with a single blue stone. It was my mother's, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. It's not fancy, but it's been waiting for the right woman. That's you, Dahlia. It's always been you, even before we met. The ring fit perfectly, the blue stone catching the afternoon sunlight. Dahlia looked from it to Quentin's face, her heart so full it might burst. I love you, she said simply. Thank you for cutting me loose and riding beside me. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the San Augustine Church, with Judge Parker giving the bride away and Sarah Jameson standing as Dahlia's matron of honor. The celebration afterward at Sarah's boarding house was attended by the friends they had made in Tucson: Dr. Blackwell, Dahlia's fellow teachers, Quentin's colleagues from the Jameson outfit, and even Silas Brewer, who had decided to settle in Tucson after helping them escape. By summer, they had built a modest but comfortable ranch house on the Oak Crown Rise, with wide windows that captured the desert breezes and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. True to their shared vision, a small schoolhouse was erected near the creek, furnished with books donated by Judge Parker and educational materials purchased with Quentin's savings. The school opened in September 1879, welcoming children from the surrounding ranches and farms. Dahlia Walsh, as she was now known, taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history to pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Her reputation as a dedicated and innovative teacher spread throughout the region, eventually drawing families to settle nearby specifically for the educational opportunities she provided. Quentin thrived as foreman of the Jameson South Range, his fair treatment of the cowboys under his supervision, and his skilled management of the herd earning him respect throughout the territory. In the evenings, he would often sit at the back of the schoolhouse while Dahlia conducted night classes for adults who wished to improve their literacy, his pride in his wife evident to all who saw them together. Their happiness was made complete in the spring of 1880 with the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Eliza Sarah, honoring both Quentin's sister and the woman who had helped them build their new life. As Dahlia nursed their infant daughter on the porch of their home, watching Quentin work with a young colt in the corral below, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperation of being tied to that cottonwood tree to the joy of creating a home and family with the man who had cut her loose, it was a path she could never have imagined in her darkest days as Vernon Tillman's wife. Yet here she was, surrounded by love, purpose, and the freedom she had risked everything to claim. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked, coming up the porch steps and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Dahlia smiled up at him, her heart full to overflowing. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best ones. If I hadn't run from Vernon, if his men hadn't tied me to that tree, if I hadn't decided to take that shortcut," Quentin added, sitting beside her and gently touching their daughter's downy head, "then we might never have found each other," Dahlia finished. "And all of this, our home, our school, our beautiful Eliza, might never have been." Quentin took her free hand, pressing it to his lips. "I thank God every day that I found you, Dahlia Walsh. And I promise you, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret letting me ride beside you." As the sun set over their land, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Dahlia leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that she had found not just freedom, but a love worth all the trials they had endured to claim it. The rope that had once bound her had become the thread that led her to this man, this life, this happiness. And she wouldn't change a single step of the journey.